This is Owen Colfer in Dublin.
This is Andrew Donkin in London.
And this is the third episode of our marvellous podcast, Double Booked.
Double Booked is a podcast about children's books, graphic novels, comics, books, libraries, librarians, storytelling, books, bookshops, bookshelves, secondhand bookshops, and secondhand librarians.
And also those little things they hang from the ceiling in bookshops. I'm not sure what they're called.
The mobile. We'll get to those. My plan with the list is I'm just adding one every episode. And so by the time we do the 100th podcast, I'll just read the list and then just go, well, that's it for the 100th episode. Right in next week. That would
and then all the complaints will be you did not mention mobiles as you promised.
Yeah, or know what they were called.
Which,
I don't know. Which is right. I don't know if that's.
I suppose before I come on, I should look up
the dangly things.
All the things that I think are just called things. You know those things.
Alexa, what are the dangly things called? You know,
the dangly things. Don't ever say that.
That's fine.
Now I should introduce my comrade in typewriters, Mr. Andrew Donkin, and every week I'm going to tell something new about you.
Oh, crikey! Okay.
Like the basics are. 8 million copies sold worldwide, 60 books and graphic novels. But people might not know that you adapted Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels.
I did, from the movie script to be a book, absolutely.
Yeah, and how did that come about?
It came about because there's two really, really shy filmmakers who were Guy Ritchie and Matthew Vaughn, came into Sophie's office. Sophie is our mutual agent, and we're saying, we've shot this film and we think it's going to be quite cool, and we really want to get a book deal because we think a book deal will help get the distributor for the UK for a really, really small film that no one's heard of. And we said, what's it called? And they said, Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels. And we said, no, we've not heard of that. And they said, no one's heard of it. But we just really want to, do you think you can do that? And Sophie got them a book deal, and she got them a book deal in the UK and in Germany and Japan. And I was under some mad deadline, like you have to turn the film script into a novel in 4 weeks or something crazy, which we did. And during that kind of 6-month period of me doing that before the book came out, of course, the film just went stellar, and they became mega superstars of directing and producing, and have done The Kingsman and whole loads of franchises since then. And now they don't sit on Sophie's sofa saying, could you get us a book deal?
I was going to end that segment with a little joke, and whatever happened to those guys? And you've just ruined that for me now. I can't do that.
I've stepped all over that.
Exactly.
I'm not remotely. If there's no remorse.
I can. And you're not lying because I can see into your eyes.
I'm grinning. There's no.
The remorseless
monster.
That's what they are.
Now we also have to say thank you. We have to say thank you to Albert Drandoff, who is a lovely French person, and we have to say thank you to the Second Chance Schools graphic novel prize, because Illegal won that just last month, and we're allowed to announce it now. Wow. And we won it. It's voted for by school kids of teenage years in a network of 100 schools across France, and there was a short list of 4 that they selected, and then Illegal was voted top, and we won that award. I know last time we were on here you were saying it was the last ever award Illegal had won, but fate has proved you wrong, so please say that again this week.
This is absolutely the last award as possible for Illegal. So merci tout le monde, les jeunes hommes et les jeunes filles. We're very, very delighted to get that award. And can I just say, Andrew, could I have one of the awards? All the awards I never see. You show them to me and you vow to send them.
The award for this, absolutely. I will send it. I'll get them to send this to you, because the award for this is 8 stray cats that you have to look after for the rest of your life. So I will happily get them sent to your address in Ireland. It's a very French award, isn't it? Which is, it's partly nice, partly sad. Whatnot. And also we must say that the graphic novel that won it, obviously we know it as Illegal, but in France it's called Migrant, because when they were going to publish Illegal in France, they said that if they published it under our title of Illegal, everybody would think it was a graphic novel about a bank job. Everybody would assume it was some kind of caper. I thought at the time that a book that was a bank job and a caper might sell much better than a book that's about migrants crossing the Mediterranean Sea. So I wasn't necessarily personally against that, but they wouldn't do it. So it's published as Migrant.
How wrong you were. Because Migrant has been incredibly successful in France and all over Europe. I suppose it's a universal issue. This human tragedy of kids crossing the Med,
and sadly more in the news again recently in recent months than for a long time.
Yeah, it does seem it's one of those problems. I remember us talking about it and saying, well, it'll probably be solved by the time the book comes out. It's such a horrible thing. It'll probably be all sorted out, and this will be like a history book.
Yeah,
but sadly, it certainly is not. So, but anyway, on to somewhat.
Shall I tell you what we're doing? Shall I tell you what we're doing this episode?
It would be nice to give me a little.
I'll give you some hints. You are talking about for me, Myshelf and I. You have chosen the classic graphic novel, which is our first kind of comic feature on the program of V for Vendetta by Alan Moore and artist David Lloyd, which is fantastic. And you're going to be talking about your love for that. Then we have a little bit of mad science. We have a fantastic guest in the shape of award-winning, million-selling Jenny Valentine, who's going to be talking about many award-winning, who's going to be talking about her new series, A Girl Called Joy, and talking about her writing process. And then after that, we have It Was Rubbish, But I Loved It. And this week, I am championing the late 60s Spiderman cartoons, which I loved as a kid, but are absolutely rubbish.
Pants. I feel we could probably do a whole podcast on It Was Rubbish, but I loved it.
And then we have Agony Eoin. We have Agony Eoin because letters have been pouring into double booked podcast at AOL.com from people begging, asking, pleading. I don't know why. I don't know why they would come to us, but asking for literary advice. So your brain, your fine-tuned brain, will be put to test.
They see my author photo and they say, "Well, if anyone knows about abject failure, it's that guy. He's been through it." I think you may have neglected to mention mad science. So, are you mad sciencing?
Yeah, we've got a little bit of mad science. I thought I apologise if I didn't mention it. We've got a little mad science story about mysterious power cuts in a Scottish village and how that was solved.
Oh,
it's a bit of a Scooby-Doo. It's a bit of a Scooby-Doo story.
I was going to say, could you do some of it in Scottish accent?
Yeah, of course. It'll take a long time to read it, but yeah, of course.
The letters will be pouring in.
No. I'll throw it up.
Do letters don't pour in
every time we
whoosh in.
So now we have our jingle, and then we'll have our V for Vendetta if you're ready, and you're ready to tell us about your great love of that.
I wonder what they've picked this time. It's me, Myshelf, and I.
V for Vendetta by Alan Moore. I'm holding up the latest edition, which would be the DC Black label, but it actually started out as a black and white strip, as I'm sure you know. So V for Vendetta is kind of a take on Orwell's 1984. I think you would agree it's very Orwellian.
Yes.
And if you cross that with the Scarlet Pimpernel, maybe, which is the theatrical side of it, you get, and then you add in a big dash of gloom and dystopia. You get Alan Moore, who is usually such a cheery guy, but in this case, he went a little bit dark. And I think why it's so important for me, totally apart from the fact that it's an amazing graphic novel and the artwork perfectly complements the subject matter, is that it was a gateway for me back into graphic novels as an adult. I'd always loved graphic novels as a child, and I continue to love them as an adult, but it was a little bit of a nostalgic trip for me in that it used to bring me back to when I was a child and I was reading about the Justice League in the 100-pagers, or I was reading about, your friendly neighborhood Spidey. But this is a true graphic novel for grown-ups. So I was able to reconnect with the art form at my own kind of intellectual level, if you like, and enjoy it, not just as a little treat for myself because I was feeling a bit low and I wanted to go back to my childhood years, like a 13-year-old watching Barney. This was the real thing. I was enjoying this piece of fantastic literature. And I remember getting it. I went to London with my wife, Jackie, who was my girlfriend at the time, and my fiance, actually. And we went over there, and I went to a Forbidden Planet. And now, we didn't have a Forbidden Planet in Dublin at the time.
What?
No. So this was like a massive treat for me. This is how I got my comics, Andrew, in Dublin at the time. There was a guy with a kiosk on O'Connell Street in Dublin who might be there. So I would go to Dublin once every 2 months with my mum to see her sister, and my brother and I, Paul, would trudge into O'Connell Street, and maybe this guy would be there, and maybe he would have Creepy or Eerie or Vampirella, which you really loved. And in this particular case, the art, and I don't know, is this because it was colored after it was colorized, or because it was printed so often, or in the edition I got, certainly it was on newsprint, so it's very, very fragile paper, but that really suited the book.
Originally in Warrior, when it was published as chapter by chapters on month by month over 2 or 3 years, up to I think like issue 26 or something, it was black and white. Warrior was printed on very, very rough toilet paper, and it was very just stark black and white. And then when DC got the rights and collected it, they added some very muted kind of coloring, which doesn't color it up to kind of superhero levels, but just adds a little bit of coloring in an effort, I think, to make it more accessible to mainstream.
But it looks like that was done on purpose, and not for financial reasons, but to give it that kind of atmospheric, down at heel, dystopian future, where the country is ruled by the homophobic Norse Fire political party who just exterminate their opponents and slap them into concentration camps. And also, what I liked about it is a horrible thing is there's no real hero. Like this is the character who dresses up and goes around taking revenge on the people who tortured him in the concentration camps, who are now at the top of the ruling political party. And it's a very theatrical way of doing it. But he's not totally a hero. He's trying to convert people to anarchy. He's not trying to bring a peaceful rule to the country.
Sure, and his revenges are very vindictive. I mean, it is a proper vendetta. He's not giving anyone the option of resigning or leaving quietly. He is out for revenge. When you learn his backstory, you understand that that's completely justified. But he is, out for violent revenge.
But at the time when you were reading comic books, that was quite unusual. I mean, everybody's gone dark now. I mean, there's a lot of if you want revenge stories or anti-heroes, you can find them even in my own books and anywhere. But at the time, if you were reading a comic book, it was usually very, very clear who the hero was, and very understandable why they were the hero. And they usually had a code where they would not kill anybody.
Sure.
A lot of them would not even use Batman, wouldn't use guns for a long time. So to read this book where the hero did wear a mask and did look like he was supposed to be a superhero, but then acted in a way that was very unheroic and even converted people to his cause in a way that would be kind of called radicalizing now. That was quite... Not this, like, it took me a while to get to grips with it and to realize that when I finish this book, I'm not going to understand everything, or I'm not going to be squarely on one person's side or another. But all I will realize is that the world is not a safe place. So it didn't take away from my enjoyment, and it really, really impacted me. And I think it was one of the first ones. I mean, I think Alan Moore is a genius, and we've talked about him before. You know more about Uncle Alan than I do.
I love Alan Moore. Alan Moore is a huge writing hero of mine. He's fantastic. And I just say, when you're just mentioning radicalization, that of course, particularly probably maybe more in the UK than kind of Alan Moore. Of course, the V mask is a Guy Fawkes mask. Guy Fawkes is famous for being a failed terrorist to the extent that he wanted to blow up Parliament and he got caught and he didn't succeed. But V very much kind of takes on that disguise and takes on that mantle, and without giving away any spoilers, very much does succeed at redoing it. So you have to remember that when Uncle Alan was writing that, when there was that imagery, that you had various terrorist things happening in the 1980s, but Uncle Alan had taken someone and actually made someone wearing a terrorist mask. Okay, a terrorist mask from 300 years ago, but made them the hero of his story.
Yeah.
And also, what's amazing about the mask is that it has become genuinely in the real world, the V mask, as trademarked by Warner Brothers, etc., has become a symbol of international protest. It was used by protesters in China. It's been used by protesters in Hong Kong. It's been used by protesters all around the world. So that kind of idea of, as a writer, casting a spell, so Uncle Alan gets a blank piece of paper and he writes V for Vendetta on it, which, as you've already said, is a kind of mantra, a manifesto to rise up and either have anarchy or to overthrow your oppressors. And now in the real world, all over the world, those V masks are sold in the hundreds of thousands to people who want to remain anonymous on CCTV cameras as they protest about things that they care about. So in that way, Alan has really kind of changed the world and given people tools to actually protest just as V does, which is amazing.
It's kind of amazing, and there's very few writers or artists who can claim to have done something like this. And it's funny you used the word anonymous there, because I think Anonymous use it as their symbol as well, don't they? When they have a spokesman, he always wears the V mask. So that's it, really. And I would urge you to go, if you haven't read that. And I suspect most people who are listening to me and you and the likes of us, as we say here in Ireland, will know this book and possibly will already have read it, but it is a book that bears repeated rereadings, and the beauty of a graphic novel is that you can read it, but also you can just pore over each frame and marvel how they are done, and the artwork, because David Lloyd is fantastic also. So
he's great. And as a free plug on V for Vendetta, there's a lovely cartoon and comic museum called the Cartoon Museum in London, which is at 63 Wells Street, and they currently, running until Halloween 2021, they have an exhibition on called V for Vendetta Behind the Mask, and it's a big room full of David Lloyd's fantastic original artwork and some installation pieces and a video interview with David Lloyd all about the making of V and the making of the comic strip. So if you're in London and you can get into the Cartoon Museum in Wells Street, it's well worth a look.
Wow, excellent. I will actually, hopefully I'm hoping to get over to see you next month. So it'd be great if we could get, the COVID masks. We get V for Vendetta COVID masks. That would be fantastic if we could manage that.
Hello, you're true to the Weird Science Department. Have you tried turning it on and off again?
Well, there's no beating V for Vendetta, but this is S for Starling. So here's a kind of mystery story. This is from the Fortean Times a couple of months ago, who is a great magazine that has all kinds of fantastic weird stories in it. The mystery of an unexplained series of power outages across a small Scottish town has been solved after video footage revealed the cause to be starlings dancing on the power lines. At dusk, the combined mass of starlings in a murmuration was found to be responsible for bouncing overhead electricity lines, which caused circuits to trip, thus bringing about interruptions to the electricity supply. The starlings' antics were first discovered by Neil MacDonald, a Scottish power engineer who had been sent out to investigate the mysterious power cuts. He cracked the case while on an evening walk to check the lines, using a camera phone to capture the spectacle. He says, "In all my 14 years working for the energy networks, I've never seen anything like this. For all the birds looked small, but the sheer number of them caused the wires to bounce up and down as they danced on and off. Thousands of birds way down the land lines every time they landed en masse, and the murmuration would set off together and trigger an outage. The starling said, and we would have got away with it if it wasn't for you and those pesky kids."
That is very strange. I feel that that's the kind of thing where it's only a matter of time before some London artist turns it into an installation somewhere. He manages to get them to do murmurations on command. So someone from Hackney maybe will, and that'll be what. So do they know why the starlings are doing this? Is it like a start?
Well, I think the starlings are doing it deliberately, aren't they? The starlings are doing it deliberately. That's why they're doing it. Some supervillain, Starling Man, let's call him, just for now, is training them to do it with a view to an attack on a major city to hold it to ransom. He's going to go along and bounce up and down on your power lines. Not the metaphor. And then there'll be outages, and he can demand any amount of packets of jammy dodgers he wants. Jammy dodgers Jaffa Cakes, Bourbons, the biscuit industry will be at his mercy.
I just wasn't speaking there. I was wondering how long you could keep that going for. And now I realize ad infinitum, forever.
I could see you nodding
forever.
off. That's the only reason I stopped. I could just see your eyes closed.
But seriously, please do not give away good ideas like that on the airwaves. We could have got a trilogy deal from Starling Man and the Jammy Dodgers. I feel
Starling Man.
I feel we could. So is this happening? If this starts happening all over the world, I will suspect a conspiracy. And actually, it's a lot more believable than some of the conspiracies that are doing the rounds these days. So Starling Man, I'm already.
It's believable and also true. Just it's an actual thing that happened before we shunt it into the more believable. Is it a believable conspiracy or not? It is.
It's a real.
We don't know about Starling Man, but we suspect Starling Man.
Well, I'm seeing the costume. I feel the costume would definitely have wings. That he would lift his arms out, and these wings would unfurl. Yeah,
he would have to have some kind of giant nets, and then the starlings swoop under him, and at his command, as he's whistling, they would carry him off, wouldn't they? Like
we
that.
really should video this because people are missing the glory of Andrew Donkin being borne aloft by imaginary starlings. There would have to be, and he would have to have one favorite who was called Clarice Starling. It's like this is writing itself.
Yeah. Clarice the Starling. Yeah, absolutely. Like that.
Clarice and her dad Clarence, who has a bad heart, and they need the money for an operation. Oh, it's brilliant. There we go.
Yeah, and then they land at their secret headquarters, which is a farm somewhere in the back. You just see lots of sheep walking around with gags, just their mouths glued shut.
Welcome to the part of the show we invite writers to. We really love them and we know you love them too.
It is time now for our amazing guest, and this week we have Jenny Valentine. And just to fill you in on Jenny's backstory, not the whole backstory, because some of it is a little shady, but the stuff that's fit for public consumption. She's an award. I looked this up on Wikipedia. Stuff. Andrew is holding up really rude. I looked this up on Wikipedia, and Jenny is apparently an award-winning author for young adults. And her first novel won the Guardian Prize in 2007, which is very annoying. I looked up me and Andrew on Wikipedia, and it said they claim to be friends with Jenny Valentine. So we need that confirmed. That
I need to look you up on Wikipedia, but I haven't done my research.
So there was actually 14.7 million articles about Jenny Valentine. So you down towards the end of that list.
Did you read all of them?
No,
did you read all of them?
No, I read 13 million, and then it started. There was apparently a second Jenny Valentine who was married to one of the Chilean miners who was stuck down that mine. So there's a few articles about her. That came in at about 13.9 million. So the rest of them are all Jenny. So other books include Broken Soup, Fire Color One, Iggy and Me, and of course her new series, which is all about a girl called Joy, which is fantastic. So welcome to Double Book, Jenny.
Thank you so much. It's very exciting to be here with you, here with you.
I know.
I've missed you. I've missed you both.
Where are you speaking to us from, Jenny?
I am speaking to you from Wales, from quite wet, but very beautiful.
So we have three different countries.
Do we?
We have three different countries.
Yes. Yeah, I'm in Narnia. I'm in Narnia. Andrew's in Middle Earth, and you're in Wales, and all of those are fictional.
Your new series is A Girl Called Joy, and I've read that and enjoyed that with my daughter Lexi. It seemed to me that you were probably quite rightly deliberately setting out to write something that was an antidote to a lot of the woe and misery that's around in the real world, and something that was full of positive things. Is there any truth in that?
This interview is now over. That's it in a nutshell. Exactly. That's exactly what I wanted to do. I was in the house, and I was thinking about children. I've never written a middle grade book before, and I was thinking, about kids of that age and what they were having to put up with or live through or, experience without really necessarily fully understanding what was going on. And also it was Brexit as well. It was just kind of a perfect storm of rubbish stuff happening. And I didn't want to, I suppose the usual middle grade book, a child lives a small life and discovers a huge world of adventure. So I just did it backwards. I mean, having said all of that, I didn't realise I was doing these things until after I'd done them, because that's kind of how it works, isn't it? But I wanted to write about a child who had seen the world and was now no longer able to see the world in the same way. And yeah, she's an optimist. I read Pollyanna for research, and then I thought I must make her less irritating than Pollyanna.
Well, she's very likable. She's she's very positive, but she's a very likable character because she sees the humour in things, and she sees where things are slightly ridiculous. And she is, at least at the beginning, slightly disappointed to be not living that kind of travelling life, although she finds, she finds the positive side of everything around her.
Yeah, she does. And the other thing I was setting out to do, I suppose, was write about what is everyday magic is the phrase, I suppose. The kids that were living in our reality now didn't necessarily know that they had the resources to make it as positive an experience as they possibly could. And that's what Joy does. She's just an optimist. She doesn't have a superpower. She says she doesn't really have a superpower, except she kind of does, by refusing to be bowed by things. It made me really cheerful. It made me feel very cheerful while I was writing it. I've actually written 3 now, so I'm done being cheerful. I'm stopped.
Well, number 2 is just come out. Number 2 is just come out.
Number 2's out, and number 3 is I've done the first draft of number 3, so that will be out next year.
I was really when I read about the parents' journey in the first book, that kind of struck a real chord with me. You know, these 2 socialist travelers who were kind of forced by circumstance to move back in with a very strict dad. And I read that horrified. I was like, oh my God. And that's a real thing though. There's a lot of people, maybe slightly younger than me, that just had to move home, whether it's property prices, whether it's, the travel money running out, and just to be forced to make that soul-crushing decision of moving back in with the parents. So was that just a fictional device, or is that something you had encountered or people you knew?
Well, it was mostly a fictional device, and actually I did it, and the reason they moved back is because Joy's grandfather is actually on his own and quite vulnerable. So it was a charitable act in one way. It wasn't out of necessity necessarily, but obviously the effects are the same. And I suppose part of me thought that this is, one of the other things that happened to us all in lockdown is that epidemic of loneliness just got bigger and bigger and wider, and old people were really isolated. And I think that was just in my mind. I mean, I think, between my children leaving home and my father's not alive anymore, but between my children leaving home and my mum getting old, seems like about 30 seconds of kind of dizzying freedom. And now it's kind of...
I was just going to say, there's a lovely paragraph in there about that where the mum says that she couldn't bear to think of her dad being alone, and that's the reason that they moved back to look after him and after he had a fall. And I think that will resonate with loads and loads of parents reading it, because Owen and I are both looking after to a certain degree. Parents as you kind of get older and people live longer, I think that's a more and more common problem. And for that character to give up their life to have that pull where they really do want to go back and look after her dad is something that's really going to strike a chord. Yeah,
and I think culturally, our country, we don't really have that. It's not ingrained in our culture. It is optional. But in many cultures, and I mean, Joy's lived in some of them, that's just what happens. Your elders are in the heart of the family. They're in the heart of the house. They're still actually the most powerful members of the family. Then it's not a question of being visited once every 2 weeks or whatever.
Absolutely. I mean, when I talked to my parents about it, when my dad was alive, the grandmother lived in one of the siblings' houses and was in the corner by the fireplace, and that was the way it was. But that's not the way it is anymore, which I think is probably not great. But it's certainly, as your society gets richer, the older people get shunted to the side.
Is it wealth? Is it kind of individualism or whatever that word is? It's a kind of, I am the most important person in my universe and I don't have to sacrifice things for anyone. And actually, family means more than that. And these books are really about family.
Because in a world, there's a lot of dystopia and misery in fiction at the moment, so it's great to have a little ray of joy in there, or a little trilogy of joy in there.
Three little rays of joy.
3 little rays,
and
just
I'm
like me,
Seamus,
Seamus,
find her annoying.
and
so
Andrew.
I was worrying a little.
I know. Can you do a reading for us?
I can.
Which can you give us a little intro and?
Yes, I'll give you a little intro. I'm going to read to you for a minute from the first Joy book, which is called originally A Girl Called Joy. So Joy has moved back from her many places of delight to the very boring 48 Plane Tree Gardens with her granddad, and she and her sister Claude, who I love and who is quite cynical, have gone to school for the very first time because they've been homeschooled all their lives. And her teacher and nemesis is called Mrs. Hunter. And I'm just going to read a tiny bit about Joy's relationship with Mrs. Hunter. I'm pretty sure that every single one of my new teacher's sentences starts with the word no, especially if the sentence in question is directed at me. Mrs. Hunter says that I am bad at listening and bad at keeping quiet and bad at reaching my full potential. She is all over the things I am bad at. I think she is focusing too much on those and that she would like me a whole lot more if she thought about what I'm actually good at. When I dare to make this suggestion, she looks like I have tried to feed her rotten fish while flicking hot chili powder in her eye. She pulls the same rotten fish with chili face when I tell her that reaching your full potential is technically impossible, because potential is always and only about what happens next. It is exactly the same as the end of the rainbow, which Claude has been reminding me since I was 4 years old that you can't actually reach. This fact about potential is what I would call interesting and Mrs. Hunter would call cheeky. Cheeky is one of her top 10 favourite words to use about me. I'm trying not to remember the other 9. It is hard being the school version of me. I don't know how I'm supposed to spend another second sitting still and being quiet and keeping my shoes on at all times and not laughing at funny things. The thought of weeks and weeks of school fills me with absolute dread. These days I find myself wishing for moving day to come, even though I know full well that there is going to be no such thing. The end. That's Joy being slightly less than positive for a change.
It's so great. And also Claire Lefebvre has done an amazing job.
Hasn't she just? Yeah. And I mean, there's a very beautiful big oak tree in the first book, and she has drawn the most beautiful tree. I love that she's doing the books. And Joy 3 is there's quite a lot of astronomy in Joy 3, so I'm really looking forward to her work on that.
Can you talk to us about your process? What's your process when you are approaching a new book for the first time, and planning, not planning, and characters, and what's your approach? Because we have a lot of listeners that are writing their own stuff, a lot of listeners that just love reading books, that are fascinated by the behind the scenes, how people get stuff done.
I love the word process for a start, because it makes it sound like there is some kind of premeditation and process around the whole shambles that is the searching out for something. I'm just at the beginning of something now, and I flounder around an awful lot and trying to find the beginning of something. I don't plot my books ever. I used to make a virtue of that because I thought it does make writing really exciting because I don't know what's going to happen next. It also makes writing incredibly infuriating because I don't know what is going to happen next. So I also just know that I can't really do it. If I try, it never turns out the way I was expecting. So I just begin. I'm sure other writers say that to you. Everybody seems to have their own particular way of doing things.
Of course, that's what makes it interesting. Everybody has their own method, and if it works for them, then
it works for them. Do you plan things?
I do. I mean, it's very loose plot. I would have maybe 2 pages of a plot, and once I get the main skeleton, then I go. But I don't feel confident enough to go until I have that skeleton, and often I just ignore it completely. But it's like a safety net. you can go back to it if you're in a difficult place. But having said that, every single book I've ever written, there's been a big crisis about 2/3 of the way through where I think I can't. There's no way to finish this. And then I ring Andrew and ask him what he's doing, and I feel so much better by because we encourage each other. We do encourage each other. And
you have to. I plot as well, roughly the same as Owen. Then it might change a lot. And also, obviously, you have to kind of plot if you're working with somebody on something like illegal. If you get a third of the way through, and Owen rings me up and says, "Andy, when are we having the songs in? This is a musical, isn't it? When are we having the songs in?" And I say, "No, I thought this was a Western. This is not a musical." Then you're in some trouble. So you have to have a certain amount of okay, it's going to be roughly like this, but with enough freedom to completely, change it as you want if you have better ideas.
I was getting into a bit of a sludge, I suppose, would be the word. And then I read this terrifying thing about Murakami, and he said, not that I'm comparing Joy with anything that Murakami wrote, but we have the same job. Never mind, the outcome is not the same. And he said, I wake up at 4:00 every morning and I write for 5 or 6 hours, and then I run 10 miles, and then I swim 15 miles, or maybe I do both. And then I listen to music and read a book, and then I go to bed at 9. And I do the same thing every day while I'm writing a novel to self-mesmerize. And I read this thing and I had a few reactions. I had a spectrum of responses. One was just, well, who the hell is doing your laundry and your cooking and posting your letters and, cleaning up after you? And 2, if you can do it, I can bloody well do it. Sorry. If you can do it, I can do it. So for the third Joy, I did get up at 5 and write until 12.
5 p.m. till midnight suits me. I think that's an ideal time to be writing. It's not that special.
No, it's not that special. Try 5 in the morning. It's very special. But then also you get your whole, by the time you're really awake, you've got the day to yourself, and you've also done quite a lot of writing. And I found that if I work very early in the morning when no one else is using the creative internet or indeed awake, I can make better progress. I make clearer decisions. I am a better thinker in the mornings. So that is, I suppose it's not really a process, but it's a routine that I have fallen into. It's useless when you're at the beginning of coming up with something, because you just wake up at 5 and drink coffee and stare into space and go back to bed again. It's not very good. But the writing itself...
It sounds brilliant.
Yeah.
Is that like 90 days, or how long would you do that for? How many days?
As long as it takes, Owen. So
that's very strict.
This was,
okay.
I mean, the first draft of the Joy book wasn't 90 days.
Jenny, you should come on our next planning day in the Covent Garden Hotel in London, because believe me, we do plan for about a day and a half for every book, and it's fantastic what comes out of that day and a half. So the next time.
Often you can work so hard that the next morning when you get up, I find I've done so much thinking with Owen the night before that I might have a little headache for a bit of the next morning.
Yeah.
So that's something just to watch out for.
It's a little thinky head. He's got bad thinky head. So I'm stunned. Let's talk about this later on. Listen, I'm thanks, Jenny. We all gotta go. I have to go.
We've all got to go. Son. I'm going to press the leave button.
Jenny, thank you so much. You're a great guest. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you. Bye.
See you soon.
It was rubbish, but I loved it.
Well, that was fantastic. I imagine you learned a lot there about writing, Andrew. Obviously, I knew most of it already, but there were a few things I picked up. And now we're moving on to another section. It was rubbish, but I loved it, where we take something that was on the face of it quite naff, but really worthy of our love. And what is your beloved rubbish this week, Andrew?
What my beloved rubbish this week is something that survived for kind of 50 years of popular culture in memory, and has probably the greatest theme song certainly ever written in the history of film and television. And it's Spiderman, the 1967 cartoons, which are often repeated, were often repeated through the 70s and through the 80s when we would have seen them. And nobody needs to have a reminder of the theme tune, but here is one. It goes like this.
Spider-Man does whatever
and that has been used in the modern Marvel universe. I had a marching band do it in one of the Spider-Man films recently, and Michael Bublé did a version of it which went like this. And all of that comes from a really, really awful Marvel cartoon in 1967, Spider-Man. Now, this seems incredible for people that are listening to this podcast that have grown up on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is fantastically well-made films, brilliantly cast, brilliantly written, brilliantly directed, with amazing special effects. During the 70s and 80s, if you were a Marvel fan, there was almost nothing. There was almost nothing on TV, nothing in film. And the Spider-Man cartoons were really, really dodgy 15-minute animations. In my memory, about 50% of the time in any given cartoon was stock footage of him swinging around a city. When I watched them as a little kid in the 70s, even I knew it was stock footage, and I knew they would just repeat themselves. And whenever Spider-Man would go, "Oh, I'd better go to the other side of the city," my 5 and 6-year-old self would go, no, don't move, don't change locations, because I knew that it meant 45 seconds of really tedious stock footage of him just swinging against walls. And you could see it was the same wall. It was the same wall every episode, just swinging like that. And even I would just, "No, please don't change locations, Spidey, stay there." And the animation was dreadful. The first series features some proper Spider-Man villains from the comics, and the second and third series, he was fighting like mad monsters underground that was nothing to do with Spider-Man. But just the fact that it was a superhero Marvel thing that was moving on your television screen, and it had the best theme tune ever, just meant that it lives on. It lives on in people's imaginations, and it lives on in people's fondness. And kind of stills from it often pop up now on the internet as memes and with stuff over the top of them, because it's kind of one of those shows which is embedded in so many different generations' childhoods, because it was repeated so often. And now if you want to catch a look at them, you can just look up Spider-Man 1967 on YouTube, and there's loads of them for free on YouTube, and everybody knows the theme tune.
Often with these things that stay in our hearts, it's an associative thing. So was this a very happy time in your life? And do you remember where you were? Were you just at home, or maybe were you at your nan's house or something?
Yeah, I would have watched them at home in the 70s at home, and Spider-Man would have come on, and I was constantly disappointed. I remember just going, "Oh, it's a Spider-Man cartoon." And even though I knew it was going to be a continuation of the one last week, it'd be the same, the same series, I would sit down and try and watch it and just go, "Oh, this animation is awful." And no, he's changing locations. They're going to do the stock footage. There's the stock footage. And it would drive me a little bit bonkers every week, but I couldn't give it up because I love Marvel comics and I read Spider-Man comics weekly, and I needed a dose of something on TV. And every single week it failed to deliver any kind of intellectual nourishment or any kind of special effects or any kind of decent animation. The only thing that was decent about it was the theme tune, which was by, I found out today looking up, by a guy called Paul Francis Webster. Wrote the fantastic lyrics. Webster wrote the lyrics, and he was a 3-time Oscar winner. He won Oscars for songs written for Hollywood musicals. The music for it is by Bob Harris, who did various incidental music on TV. But the lyrics to the Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can, was written by a 3-time Oscar winner, which is, I guess, why they have stood the passing of time. So
I do remember vaguely that it was very 2-dimensional. Like there wasn't much in the way of perspective. When he walked, he seemed to walk crab-like sideways across a flat surface. And when he swung, he would swing sideways. So he was never swinging away from you or swinging towards you. It was always just sideways across the screen. But no,
and he would sometimes climb up a wall, like of a building that would clearly been shown as 3 stories high, and then get punched off it, and then he would fall down a building that was seemingly 21 stories high, because it was just easy to repeat the shot where he was falling down.
Nice. It's funny that even at that age, you were aware, "Oh, this is terrible. This is terrible." But yes, I will.
Oh, I was a picky little sod. Yeah. Even at that age, it's just going, "That's just stock footage. That's not, you haven't done this specially for me for this episode. You're just showing the same wall. That wall was in it last week. That's not right."
But I suppose young people nowadays would not realize how little there was on TV for us at that time. If you were 10 or 11 or whatever we were, there wasn't really anything. There was programs for little tiny kids, and then there was programs for adults, but for anything in between there wasn't a whole lot. So you would watch even naff things, and Top of the Pops I think I felt the same about that. I loved it, but you were 90% disappointed because, as always, popular music is mostly not great. And even though we kind of tend to eulogize the 70s and the 80s and the 60s musically, if you look back on it, it's never that great. Most music is not great. So Spiderman, I remember watching it, and I remember having that same feeling of a disappointment. But still,
But still coming back. I would still come back stupidly and foolishly to be slightly disappointed again the next week. Still,
I imagine that the listeners to this podcast are feeling pretty much the same. They would listen to it last time and say, listen, it was their first or second go. They're going to get better. Well, I'm sorry, listener. This is us. This is who we are.
This is just it. Do you think they'll be drawn back in the way that we were drawn back to Spider-Man cartoon in a cycle of permanent hope and disappointment?
I think if they thought you might be pushed off a tall building every week, maybe they would. So if you wouldn't mind making your way to a tower and just leaping off and falling for a long, long time.
Just fall forever. That's the thing. You just go down and down and down against the same window with the same person.
But we could just do a sound effect. Luckily, they wouldn't have to see it. We can just hear the whoosh.
So that's my entry for It Was Rubbish, But I Loved It. Spider-Man cartoons from 1967. Amazing theme tune. Terrible storytelling. Terrible animation. Nice. But absolutely loved it.
Me too. I agree. 100%.
Thank you for your question. Agony Eoin will be with you shortly.
And now it's time for Agony Eoin. We've had some lovely letters in to our email address, doublebookpodcast@aol.com. If you have any writing queries, writing questions, writing issues, writing problems that you would like Agony Eoin to give you some advice on, then please write in. So I'm going to delve straight in with this one from Claire from Leicestershire. Claire says, Dear Owen and Andrew, my brother has been working on various books for about 10 years. He is a fantastic writer who builds incredible worlds. He writes sharply and with great humour, but he never manages to finish a book before he's picked holes in the plot and thrown the whole thing out. I write for a living, but I write funding proposals on behalf of charities. I work to deadlines, and although I take real pride in my writing, I believe that finished is better than perfect. I suspect that what separates successful writing from aspiring writers is that they have sent their work out into the world. No one will publish your book if they don't know about it. So Claire's question is, when do you know that your work is done and ready for a wider audience? And she says, thank you for the podcast. I really enjoy listening to writers talk about their craft and the books that have inspired them. So, Owen, when do you know when your work is done and ready for a wider audience?
I think you have to accept that you're never going to be 100% happy with your work. And that is a good thing, because that's what keeps you improving, hopefully, with every novel. So it's very, very natural not to be happy and not to be prepared to send it out. And indeed, I was so bad at this that my second editor, Sarah, the wonderful Sarah Hughes that you know as well, Andrew,
I do.
Eventually had to say to me, we're done. This is done. We are not doing any more with this. It's going out. And even now, and you've seen this, Andrew, when I'm reading at a book event, I'll be editing what I'm reading. So I'll be reading from my own book, and as I go live, I will be changing sentences that I'm not yet happy with, even if the book has been out for 15 years. So there comes a point where you just have to trust your editor. But of course, if you're at a stage where you don't yet have an editor, that's a different proposition. So what I would say is, once you reach a certain point in your word count, and your plan is done, you're happy with the plan, and you reach a certain count, then you make a deal with yourself that you're going to finish that book. For me, it's 10,000 words. Once I get over 10,000 words, I'm going to finish. Now, often I'm tempted to stop. The book I'm working on at the moment, I was tempted to stop. I'm so glad I didn't, because I got to the 10,000 and then I wasn't allowed because I had made a deal with myself. Now, if you have major worries, you just have to fix them. If you have a plot point, fix your plot. It does not mean throw your book away. It means you need to go back and look at the plot. That is the nice thing about writing books. If you have, I think Neil Gaiman said it, you can go back at any point and put the murder weapon where you need it to be. Nothing is written in stone until that book goes to the printing press. So I would say to your brother, listen, bro, it is very important to get, I don't know, maybe you're not that familiar with him. You might not call him bro. And I'm taking a bit of a leap there. Once you get to that 10,000 or whatever your personal line is, then you got to finish that book. So whatever happens, it's finished. And the very art of finishing a book is very cathartic, and it gives you the confidence that you are able to finish a book. So even if that book is not the one that gets published, it might be the next one. And it took me 6 books to get published. So I wrote 6 books that weren't published. But each one I finished, I learned from, and I'm still learning.
I think it's very important to finish things, isn't it? When Claire says, but he never manages to finish a book before he's picked holes in it. It's when you've got something that's finished, be it good, bad, indifferent, you've got a finished project which you can improve. When you have a half-built plane that's never going to fly off the runway, that can't fly because it's half-built, you don't have a finished project. No. And that's a different feeling.
It is, and it's much easier to throw away something that does not have the words "the end" in it. Once you have written the book and you have the first draft, psychologically, it's really hard to throw that book away. So I would say you finish it and then go back and correct it, and try to put those doubts aside until you've got the first draft done. But everyone's journey with a novel is very personal, so it's not a one-size-fits-all plan. But for me, that works. Give yourself a limit, 10,000 words, and after that, you're going to finish. So maybe I hope that helps.
Now, our next question is from Levy Sweeney, and they say, I loved Artemis Fowl when I was a kid. It really turned on my imagination and helped inspire me to do my own writing. Thank you so much for the inspiration your novels provided. Nothing for me there. It's just.
I'm sure as a general.
When you were writing the Artemis Fowl books, did you do research on organised crime and criminal escapades and the like? I seem to recall a chapter in the Opal Deception where Artemis goes over a list of famous criminals in his head. Were those real famous criminals, or did you just make them up? I think I remember that bit. I think they were real famous criminals. But how much research on organised crime and criminal escapades, which is a phrase I like, criminal escapades, how much did you do for the Artemis?
I did quite a bit. I mean, I think I tried to research everything I was doing, because I believed, and I still believe, that if you can interweave fact and fiction and make it difficult for the audience to know which is which, that they will believe everything. That it all becomes believable. So I really wanted to create a world in which Artemis Fowl could exist and make that world seem as real as possible. And so if I mentioned scientists or science especially, it was usually very real. And then I would just put in Artemis's pseudoscience in the middle, and that would also seem real. So if I had Artemis in with a bunch of criminals and I mentioned other criminals, they would usually be real. So it would be difficult for the reader to spot what did not exist in the actual world. And that's something that I continue to do. And I use a lot of pop culture references, and I always have. And they're all usually pretty real. But sometimes reality is so fantastical that people don't believe it because it's in Artemis Fowl. And an example of that would be, I remember I tried to put in, as you know, something about the environment or the ecology in every book, I'll make a little point. And in book 2, I was talking about nuclear submarines that are just lying around in the bay outside Murmansk in Russia. And people didn't believe that. They thought, surely they're not just letting nuclear submarines lie around. But they are. And I think it's a huge environmental worry that is not really talked about. But because it was in a book about leprechauns, nobody believed that.
Why didn't people take that seriously?
I know. I realized my mistake quite early on.
Fart gag, serious ecological message about nuclear submarines laying on the ocean floor. Fart gag.
When you say it like that, it sounds pretty obvious that it would not be. But
no,
so that's why we kind of had to start. Well, when we're doing our graphic novels, it's a completely new, separate series because we want it to be taken seriously. So I think if we had done it as part of an Artemis Fowl graphic novel, it would have been wasted. So So that's what I learned from that. But yeah, the short answer is yes, I do.
Great, thank you. That's the end of Agony Eoin. Thank you very much for that and all the answers to the questions. And if you've got more questions for Eoin, then it's doublebookpodcast@aol.com.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, we have arrived virtually unscathed at the end of podcast episode 3, Double Booked. But next time, please, dear listeners, tune in for the amazing Cressida Cowell, who will be joining us in her own studio, not our studio, because of the pandemic. But we'll be talking to Cressida, and Andrew and I, and your son actually, Fisher's a huge fan of Cressida's, I believe, Andrew.
Yeah. Well, I'm a huge fan. She's a fantastic writer. Obviously, How to Train Your Dragon series, and she's in the UK. She's my trade union rep at the moment. She's my leader. She's our Captain America because she is a children's laureate.
Yeah.
A position that you have held very brilliantly and very well in Ireland. But she is currently our Captain America. She is our leader in England. I don't know if it worked for you like this when you were children's laureate in Ireland, but in England, when you're children's laureate, you can, if you're just walking around, you can knock on the door of any house that you fancy, and if they've got kids in the house, if they've not got kids, it doesn't work. If they've got kids in the house, you can demand an evening meal, and they have to feed you if you're a children's laureate. It's great. So, when you're walking home, you're walking down the street and you smell something, someone's got maybe a bacon sarnie on, someone's got a nice curry on, you say, oh, wouldn't that be great if that was my house? If you're children's laureate, you just go and knock, boom, our children's laureate, she's got a little card. They all have little cards. Do that, and that's it.
Over here we had what was called the potato medal. And you could just have a potato tithe. So you just went in, knocked on the door, held up your medal, and they would have to give you a potato no smaller than that medal. So,
nice. Okay, all right.
Unfortunately, it would just said deliver. So often it would be delivered straight to your face. That wasn't. So it leaves a little bit of fine tuning, that particular potato tithe rule. But, we're working on it.
Well, there may be something to learn from the free food rule. So we can talk to Cress about that next week. We will ask her next podcast. We can talk to Cress about that next podcast and see how that's working out.
Absolutely.
Double Booked was produced by Eoin Colfer and Andrew Donkin and Seamus Redmond. Sound editing by Seamus Redmond. Theme tune by Liam Bates. This has been a Silver Foxes production. Remember, other Silver Foxes are available, although very likely not as good.